welcome to the fifth day of the inaugural Festival of Ideas. My name's Dr. Chris McAuliffe, and I'm here to introduce and chair our session on the rise of Chinese contemporary art. Before I introduce our two speakers, just a couple of comments by way of background and format. It's interesting to me that my first encounter with Chinese contemporary art came in 1994 at an exhibition entitled Post-Mao Product at the Ballarat Fine Art Gallery, and it was curated by one of our speakers, Claire Roberts. An exhibition such as that suggests an early interest in Chinese contemporary art on the part of Australian scholars and curators, and I think an openness to the new art from China on the part of galleries and museums. And I thought it was particularly telling that Ballarat, with a powerful history of Chinese culture through the Gold Rush era, took that show 15 years ago. And that interest has grown through major events such as the Asia-Pacific Triennial and numerous cultural exchanges, many of them organised by AsiaLink, of course, as you know, housed in this building. And globally, that rise of contemporary Chinese art has been phenomenal. Paintings in that 1994 exhibition, listed then as collection of the artist, very soon after entered major international collections and now change hands for vast sums that Australian artists can only dream of. Some of those artists have been considered world historical figures, even likened to Van Gogh. Perhaps that's market hyperbole, but that's the kind of parallels that are being drawn. And that market registers another astounding characteristic of contemporary Chinese art. In 2007, 5 of the 10 best-selling living artists at auction were Chinese-born, placing Chinese artists alongside the likes of Damien Hirst and Gerhard Richter. So that is a thumbnail sketch of the impact, but our two speakers will address the topic in much more detail. Jeremy Barmay is an Australian Research Council Federation Fellow based at the Australian National University, an historian, a cultural critic, a filmmaker and a web archivist who works on Chinese cultural and intellectual history from the early modern period through to the present. Claire Roberts is a senior curator in Asian arts and design at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney and a research fellow with Jeremy Barmay's Australian Research Council Federation Fellowship Project at the Australian National University. Because we only have two speakers, we are going to rotate. Jeremy will speak, then Claire, then Jeremy, then Claire. It's an AB structure, which will move from introduction to detail and then on to the future. And at the conclusion of those, that elegant rhythm, you from the floor will be able, I might say almost Cartesian rhythm, we'll invite questions from you on the floor. And I've warned our speakers that as this is the fifth day, there are many of you there who have been nurturing questions since Monday or Tuesday, which I'm sure will come out with great gusto. So Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you for that kind, near-philosophical introduction. The date 1978 is related to China's present phase of development, a political moment it is when China's open door and reform process began, initiated by the Chinese Communist Party. So today I will, rather than trying to look back at the vast and complex history of 20th century Chinese art and its development, we'll take that date and remark first on the art and cultural developments that are very much ordained by the political history of China in the last 30 years, because that gives us some context, perhaps, to go into Claire's more detailed discussion of artists and trends and actual artwork. So mine's a verbal presentation, no striking images or any of the fascinating and important work that has made up the extraordinary transformation of the Chinese cultural image internationally in the last 30 years, in particular in the last 15 years or so. As many of you may realize, this year in the People's Republic of China is a year heavy with anniversaries. Commentators both in and outside China have observed that 2009 is the 60th anniversary of New China. It is also a date that completes one cycle of the traditional Chinese calendar, the Jiazi. This is a false understanding of time in Chinese terms, but nonetheless, people comment that this is a period of both completion and renewal and possible further dramatic change. And regardless of how one views the calendar, traditional Chinese or Western, this year is one weighty with remembrance. It is also a significant year for modern Chinese art because it's a year that commemorates extraordinary developments in contemporary Chinese art that date from 1979 and also 1989, about which I'll say a few words, and Claire also will refer to in her discussion. As you know, on October the 1st this year, China's National Day, the Chinese state will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. That day will be marked in particular by a lavish parade, a grand parade that is being orchestrated and designed by a team led by, in name at least, led by one of the people who first came to prominence in China as part of the cultural avant-garde of the 1980s. That's a man by the name of Zhang Yimou, a film director who is noted most recently as one of the creative team behind the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics. Yimou is also designing this year's National Day, formal National Day celebrations on the evening of October the 1st. He is joined by one of China's most famous internationally recognized artists, a man by the name of Cai Guoqiang, whose work was first introduced in Australia many years ago. And Lao Cai, as he's known to all of us, is in charge of, again, notionally, he's not the only person, but he's always named as being the leading figure because he's a brand in his own right these days. He will design with the team the lavish pyrotechnical display that will be featured in Beijing on the night of October the 1st. And so we see just in these two figures the coalition of the state, priorities of the state, or the nation state and the Communist Party state, with elements of the Chinese avant-garde. There's been much debate about how these particular artists and many other Chinese artists and creators have been co-opted or become involved with the nation state over the last couple of years. In fact, if one looks at the evolution of modern and contemporary Chinese art over the last 30 years, and we don't have the time to go into the details of it, but I can assure you this type of strange devil's dance or Apache dance between the Chinese authorities and the avant-garde artists, whether they be filmmakers or writers, poets, novelists, and also artists who work in the plastic arts, performing arts, or oils, has been going on for over 25 years. In the West, because once the Americans began discovering contemporary art in the last 10 years or so, they felt that this is some great development, something quite new and unique. As usual, our American cousins are a little bit behind time. The year 2009 also marks other significant anniversaries in the Chinese world. Some of these will be commemorated, such as the 1st of October, with due pomp and circumstance. Others, those events best described as what I call dark anniversaries, will pass by or have passed by in an atmosphere of heightened alertness, security cordons, crackdowns and official anxiety. These dark anniversaries, as many of you will know, include such things as the uprising in Lhasa in 1959, the closing down of the Xidan Democracy Wall in 1979, the tragic events of June 1989, and the violent and grim religious repression after April 1999. That's the repression of the Falun Gong movement. They all offer the others various stories and a contentious heritage. They play their own role in the unsteady growth of the strong, unitary modern state, and also in the constant and strange topography of contemporary Chinese art and culture. These years and days, both the light and the dark anniversaries, offer a penumbra of history. They stand in shaded contrast to the vaunted moments of commemoration, those anniversaries which bask in the merciless glare of publicity and enjoy official largesse. Although formally ignored or recalled only in verso, these dark anniversaries cast a gloomy shadow of the orchestrated son et lumière of state occasions. These doppelgangers of dead anniversaries haunt the living, and many Chinese artists and cultural practitioners in their work and in their conversation about Chinese culture discuss them constantly. As we know, June 1989 marked a devastating massacre in Beijing with the repression of the mass democracy movement, a movement that aimed, among other things, to just force the Chinese authorities to engage in a meaningful dialogue with dissenting, unhappy, unsettled, protesting individuals, students, workers, and even state bureaucrats. They demanded and called for what was called 对话. For those of you familiar with contemporary Chinese art, you'll know that a couple of months before the appalling repression of June '89, there was a major Chinese art exhibition. The exhibition that led directly to some of the international world's interest in Chinese art and culture. That exhibition was held in February 1989 at the China National Art Gallery. It was sort of a summing up of the previous 10 years of artistic experimentation and avant-garde investigation of the visual culture. It was a show that offered a retrospective of work that had first appeared in 1979. Claire will touch on some of that work, The Stars, who first appeared in '79. It also offered a reflection of some of the leading avant-garde artists active in 1984, 5, 6, 7 and 8. These are artists, some of whom have gone on to mega stardom internationally, many of whom were challenging the state, challenging the accepted norms of the party state and the narratives of official Chinese culture. There was also a wonderful element of anarchic performance in that exhibition in 1989. One artist threw prawns around the gallery, selling them and hawking them, saying that after all, art is just another product to be sold and grabbed and hawked at the bourse of commodities. He's, of course, proved prescient in particular in the way that Chinese art has been received internationally. Another scattered condoms on the floor, and a third, a woman, shot a gun at her own work. Her artwork itself was called 对话, or dialogue. It was a prescient act pretending the grim events that would follow a couple of months later. The art of the 1980s, which has only belatedly been more formally recognised in China in the last 2 or 3 years, was an explosive expression of the cultural and intellectual diversity that had been simmering in the country for decades. In fact, the art of the 80s also gave expression to a type of art that had been hidden, and indeed until about 2 years ago remained hidden in China for a very long time indeed. And again, Claire will touch on that work, the work of a group of artists known as the no-name artists, or the Wu Minghua She. Artists who long before Chinese art became fashionable were pursuing their own individualistic and unique visions of the world. Again, that's art has only been recognised in China very belatedly, and the international market, I fear, has not yet recognised it. I would also note, as Chris did, that Australian scholars, curators and collectors have been involved with and aware of contemporary and avant-garde Chinese art since the 1980s, long before it became the flavour of the international art market. And it is important to remember that Australia has played a very particular type of role in cataloguing, engaging with and displaying contemporary Chinese art for over 25 years. So this is not, we're talking about something today that we've actually been involved with for a very long time indeed. Just in closing these opening remarks, I'll say that it's also worth remembering that this year commemorates the 50th anniversary of a speech that Chairman Mao gave in 1959, a speech aimed against the West. It was very much focused against what the American Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had called the possible peaceful evolution of communist countries like China and the Soviet Union into something more open, related to the international environment, culturally aware and engaged. This project of peaceful evolution was one that Chairman Mao regarded as being particularly dangerous to the Chinese nation state. Why this anniversary this year is relevant is that those of you who know what happened after June the 4th, 1989 will know that Deng Xiaoping himself said the greatest danger to China was a peaceful evolution that has been harboured by the West and as part of a strategy and a plot to corrupt Chinese culture, Chinese political and other institutions, and turn China into a vassaldom of the West. It is interesting as we consider the evolution of contemporary Chinese art that the peaceful evolution that has taken place is one that has seen a strange and symbiotic melding of the international art market with Chinese artistic practice. And as we remember Chairman Mao's warnings about the corruption and decay of China, we also can recognise the possibility of change and development and evolution in China itself. And with those remarks, I shall hand over to Claire.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Chris, and it's nice to be here, and thank you all for coming. This is the visual part of the presentation. And I'll pick up on a number of the artists and events that Jeremy's referred to and show you some of the works that they actually produced. So I too am starting in 1978, using that as the beginning of what I'm referring to as the period of contemporary Chinese art, or the beginning of what we think of as contemporary Chinese art. Because it was in 1978 that Deng Xiaoping announced what he called the open door policy, welcoming foreign business into China in order to improve the country's economic future. This policy was part of a broader movement of social liberalisation following the chaos and extremism of the Cultural Revolution. Artists took advantage of these winds of change and explored contemporary modes of expression, experimenting with a variety of different styles and media. Few could have predicted that 30 years on, works by some Chinese artists would sell at auction for $9 million and up, and that Chinese artists would move to New York, Paris, and Sydney, many in the wake of the trauma of the June the 4th massacre in 1989, and go on to achieve international success. Over the next 20 minutes, I will look back on Chinese experimental art of the last 30 years and consider the significance of key works, beginning with a brief introduction to the present. I'd like you to consider what individual artworks might tell us about the artist and his or her relationship to contemporary society, and how the art and the art making has changed over time. While we don't have any time to explore these questions in any depth, we can begin to reflect on some of the reasons behind the recent rise of global interest in contemporary Chinese art. So first of all, a quick snapshot of the situation over the past year. The Beijing Olympics, launched on the 8th of August 2008, was in many ways a watershed event, announcing China's arrival on the international stage. The opening and closing ceremonies, as Jeremy has said, created by the internationally acclaimed film director Zhang Yimou, with help from pyrotechnic artist Cai Guoqiang, and hundreds of performers from the Chinese Army's elite performance troops lend themselves to detailed cultural and semiotic analysis. The 3D imaging technology that you see in this slide, used to carry strong cultural and contemporary narratives, was an impressive display of China's emerging creative industries. But the formal raising of the Chinese flag within the stadium, in much the same way as it is carried out each morning in Tiananmen Square on the flagpole facing the portrait of Mao Zedong, left no ambiguity about who was in control. The Games was a showcase for the People's Republic of China and its dramatically remodelled capital. It was a careful and orchestrated demonstration of national confidence. In the years leading up to the Olympics, people all over the world began to take more notice of China as its economy grew to surpass that of Germany and become the third largest in the world. The international fascination with Chinese art, notably contemporary art, must be seen in this larger context of China's economic and political engagement with the world. A striking illustration of this interest may be found in the global edition of the New York Times that I'm showing you here from the 21st and 22nd of June in 2008. Every one of the 17 exhibitions listed in the Arts Guide for museums and galleries around the world related to China, and 7 focused on contemporary Chinese art and design. But global sentiment has changed dramatically over the last 8 months. Colleen Ryan, writing in the Australian Financial Review in March this year, remarked, and I quote, "The 2-year Chinese art bubble has burst from the pressure of oversupply." End of quote. Works by leading artists are now failing to reach earlier highs. Galleries are closing in the fashionable 798 art district, and many of the artists lured to Beijing are returning to their hometowns where the cost of living is much cheaper. Lin Chen Yin, who created this work titled Self-Portrait, Opening the Door in 1989, it was created just prior to his departure for Australia. Lin was one of the many artists then to return to Beijing to participate in the art boom. He now carries an Australian passport and has a studio in the artist village of Songzhuang, where Ryan reported an estimated 30% of artists had left. And he said in that article, "It's much quieter here now than in recent years. Some galleries have gone bankrupt or closed down. Studios are looking for tenants. But this situation has a positive side for artists. Artists can calm down and make better works." So what I want to do now is give you a very quick historical overview of some of the key works through which we can begin to chart a pathway back to the present. All of the works that I've selected are by influential artists. They're visually striking, they're thought-provoking, and in some cases shocking. Each of them pushes the boundary of official acceptability at the time. And I wanted to start with this modest oil painting by Zhao Wenliang, who was part of an amateur painting group in Beijing that Jeremy mentioned called No Name. Zhao depicts shadows cast by trees outside the 15th century tomb of the Ming Dynasty Emperor Yongle. The reverse, and I've included that on the slide, is inscribed, and I quote, "Zhao, made on the 18th of August 1966. Afterwards, the bloody terror of Red August occurred. From that time, we ceased painting for 45 days. On the 2nd of October, I took up the brush again. This painting has been stored in my portable painting case for close to 10 years." End of quote. It was painted on the day that Mao Zedong reviewed the Red Guards in Tiananmen Square, an event that signalled the beginning of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Small enough to be hidden in a bag, it is one of hundreds of landscapes and still-life paintings, paintings that at the time were regarded as bourgeois and counter-revolutionary, that were made by the no-name artists over the course of 3 decades, as a form of passive resistance to the political chaos that was unfolding around them. In July of 1979, the group held their first exhibition in a public venue, attracting large crowds. It was the first wild or non-official exhibition held in Beijing following the end of the Cultural Revolution. 3 months later, the first Stars Group exhibition was held on the railings of the park adjacent to the National Art Museum of China, also mentioned by Jeremy. Included in the exhibition was Silence, which is on your right, by Wang Keping, another self-taught artist who made what he described absurdist sculpture, inspired by the French theatre of the absurd from found pieces of wood. The sculpture on the left, titled Idol, is the first experimental artwork that dared to use Mao Zedong as its subject. The artist Wang Keping intended it to be displayed in the exhibition, but it was considered too politically sensitive at the time. The exhibition was closed down after 2 days, and the artists organised a demonstration to uphold the Constitution and the ideals of democracy and artistic freedom. It was the time of the Democracy Wall movement. In 1981, Wang Keping married a French woman and then moved to Paris. Around the same time, and we're still in 1979, artists were commissioned to create murals for the new Beijing International Airport, new then. Artists included Yuan Yunsheng, who'd graduated from the Central Academy of Fine Arts, China's leading art academy in Beijing, in 1962. And after the chaos and trauma of the Cultural Revolution, he returned to teach there from 1978. The murals were inspired by the Water Festival in Xishuangbanna in Yunnan province in southern China and reflected the cultural practices of the Dai people. They became controversial because Yuan depicted naked women whose bodies were elongated. It was covered up with a curtain and then boarded over during a socialist morality campaign in 1981. Soon thereafter, Yuan Yunsheng accepted an invitation to visit the United States, where he lived until his return to China in 1996. This huge canvas, titled Father, was displayed in the second National Youth Arts Exhibition at the National Art Museum of China in Beijing in 1980. In order to make it into the hang, the artist was advised by an official to add a ballpoint pen above the right ear of the farmer, which you can just see, to indicate that he was a new kind of socialist peasant. Luo Zhongli did so, and the painting was awarded the gold medal. Luo Zhongli acknowledges the inspiration of American photorealist artists. He was looking at the time for a style that would convey the ongoing poverty and difficulty of peasant life. Works like this combine elements of scar or wounded art and what was termed rustic realism. It was art that sought to critique society. And this 1983 work by Shang Yang, titled Yellow Earth Mother, is something of a companion to Lord Zhongli's father, another example of rustic realism. Second State, this work by Gong Jenny, a graduate of the Zhejiang Academy of Fine Arts in Hangzhou, China's second most prestigious art academy, shows us a very different kind of figuration. Gong Jenny was part of the 1985 New Wave art movement, and his work, made in 1987, this work is part of a triptych. Second State displays humour, but the smile or laugh is forced. The colours are cool, and there is no background or context. It's an image of contradiction and an expression of ambivalence that has been described as grey humour. Zhang Pei Li, who did this video work, is also from Hangzhou, and the Hangzhou Academy, a graduate from the oil painting department. This is a still from a video work titled 30 by 30 and was made in 1988. It's an early conceptual art video showing footage of a piece of mirror glass that's broken and put back together, filmed from a fixed viewpoint and repeated until the tape ends, suggesting boredom and futility. Another important work from 1988 is Mao Zedong No. 1 by Wang Guangyi, who founded the Northern Art Group in Harbin, to the north of Beijing. Wang rejected emotive painting styles and employed cool colours and what was termed a rational painting style. Mao Zedong No. 1 was included in the 1989 China Avant-Garde exhibition that Jeremy mentioned, held at the National Art Museum of China in 1989, and attracted incredible interest. Here Wang depicts Mao underneath a photographer's grid, or is he behind bars? This is a work by Huang Yongping, and it's titled A History of Chinese Painting, and a concise history of modern painting, washed in a washing machine for 2 minutes. It's a conceptual work from 1987 and was also included in the landmark China Avant-Garde exhibition. Huang is also from the Hangzhou Art Academy and pursued non-expressive art to distinguish his work from the dominant trend of self-expression at the time. He was from Xiamen in Fujian and the leader of the Xiamen Dada group. The act of washing was intended to destroy, to cleanse, to purify, to create something new. A Book from the Sky, the title of the work you see here, was also included in the China Avant-Garde exhibition in 1989. It's a monumental work, and this was one of the works that was included in the exhibition that Chris mentioned that was held at Ballarat. It's one of the largest and most impressive installations of the period, a technical tour de force. Each Chinese character carved by hand from woodblock, but completely illegible. It's breathtaking in its beauty and its audacity. For Xu Bing, the act of creating this work, which was meaningless, was part of a process of forgetting, following an intense period, he said, of reading Western art history, theory and philosophy in translation. It is also a critique of the power of language that lies at the heart of Chinese culture. And this is a detail showing the individual books and the characters that look like characters but cannot be read by any Chinese person. This pencil drawing by Feng Lijun was also in the landmark 1989 exhibition. It's one of a series of works that were intended to be made into lithographs but never happened because of the June the 4th massacre. Feng works from photographs of himself and his friends, but in the process he de-individualizes figures. These works in monochrome were seen to be expressive of the feelings of a generation of disillusioned or lost youth. Liu Xiaodong's Smoker, painted in 1988, was also in the China Avant-Garde exhibition. I'm showing you all these because they're important paintings and artworks, but also many of them are now in collections in Australia. We're fortunate to have them. Liu depicts people from his immediate milieu in this case a movie director, part of the new West-leaning urban elite who stands as a striking contrast to the worker seated in the shadow on the bed. Liu has painted the close confines of a dormitory room with a standard lamp, suggesting that it had been a long night of smoking, talking, and passing time. And this is the work Dialogue that Jeremy mentioned, created by Xiaolu, who's one of the few female artists in China with a high profile in the world of Chinese avant-garde art, a world that has been very closely controlled by men. The installation, titled Dialogue, was her graduation work from the Hangzhou Art Academy and was a central work in the China Avant-Garde exhibition. Xiaolu fired a gunshot into this work in the National Art Museum of China, which caused the exhibition to be closed. She and her partner were eventually arrested, and they later made their way to Australia. It is said that the gunshot, an act of defiance on the part of the artist, presaged the violence of June the 4th.